Dexter Morgan is one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of fiction, and his legendary twisted run is still ongoing, with Dexter Resurrection serving as a great revival of his story. But today I will be attempting to answer a very simple yet loaded question relating to everyone's favorite lovable serial killer. Could Will Graham from the series Hannibal catch Dexter Morgan and solve the Bay Harbor Butcher case? Or would Will's pursuit of Mr. Morgan simply buy him a first-class ticket to Dexter's table as yet another one of his victims? Now, the most important thing to do before discussing a matchup between characters from two different fictional verses like this is to lay out how exactly we're merging these two worlds. And I think it makes the most sense to set our scenario during Season 2 of the Dexter timeline. I'll essentially be removing Special Agent Frank Lundy from the story and inserting Will Graham. I find this to be the most logical way of going about this what-if scenario, because naturally having the hunt for the Bay Harbor Butcher ongoing gives us a solid entry point to insert Will Graham into the story. And by removing the rock star Special Agent Lundy, we essentially have Will Graham as an outside expert who is being brought in to explicitly solve this case. And Will Graham is a really interesting detective to talk about because his ability to recreate crimes in his head is not only super impressive, but also sort of borders on the line of being a supernatural ability. Like, I know the series Hannibal is quite grounded, and I imagine it's meant to take place in the quote-unquote real world, but just how well Will is able to visualize everything and just immediately lock on to people being killers after just briefly encountering them is absolutely wild. However, in this scenario, he's combating someone who also has the strength of good old plot armor. But all jokes to the side, for our what-if story, dozens of body bags will be found in the waters of Miami, just like in the actual Dexter timeline. And Deputy Chief Matthews will call in a favor to his buddy Jack Crawford. He'll ask Crawford if he can borrow his autistic superstar criminal profiler for a few months. And Will Graham will make his way to Miami. He'll walk into the tent where all the remains that were found are being kept, and he'll close his eyes and let his supernatural powers do their thing. Will would be able to visualize these bodies being sawed into pieces, and then he'd see a figure shrouded in darkness plunging his knife into them and delivering a fatal blow. But the face of the perpetrator is all black. He just can't quite make out who it is off of his initial visualization. Once Will snaps out of his mental recreation of these crime scenes, he'll tell the Miami Metro detectives that all these victims were killed prior to being chopped up into pieces, that they were all killed expertly, damn near surgically, with a single knife plunge into their chest. Now, Dexter Morgan, being within earshot of Will Graham as he's relaying this information, would start to sweat just a little bit. I mean, who is this nerdy detective who just came into their crime scene, closed his eyes, and all of a sudden knows exactly how Dexter killed these people? Dexter is immediately wary of Will Graham and views him as a massive threat to his anonymity, similar to how we viewed Special Agent Lundy in the actual Dexter timeline. Now, the whole Lila and Rita subplot would still be ongoing for Dexter throughout the Bay Harbor Butcher case, as well as Dokes tailing him every night, so his personal life will still be in turmoil to say the least. And given that Will Graham does present a serious threat, and Lila is still influencing Dexter, I believe he would still send his manifesto to Miami Metro in an attempt to throw Will and everyone else off of his scent. But just like it was in the main timeline, this will again prove to be a massive mistake, since Will Graham, the smartest person in the room, would be able to piece together that whoever the BHB killer is likely someone with intimate knowledge of how these investigations are conducted. Will would start to turn his focus to the very people who are part of Miami Metro. This is where things start to get a little contentious. In Will's conversations and brief interactions with everyone within Miami Metro, could he tap into his extreme empath powers and realize that Dexter is the killer they're all looking for? I'm inclined to believe that Will at the very least would see that Dexter carries a dark presence with him. A sort of black figure shrouded in darkness, not too dissimilar from who he saw plunging their knife into these BHB victims. I don't think this is enough to get Will to believe that Dexter is without a shadow of a doubt the person that they're looking for, but I do think it's enough for Will to be suspicious of Dexter. Now, with both Lila and Dokes in play, we still get the fiery showdown between Dexter and Dokes, and Lila ultimately killing Dokes to exonerate Dexter. But the big question becomes, does Will Graham accept that James Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher, or does he keep suspecting Dexter? All the quote-unquote evidence points towards Dokes being the man they're looking for, but all of Will's autistic and empathic intuition, or superpowers, whatever you want to call them, are telling Will that Dokes was innocent. As he goes to the crime scene where Dokes was incinerated, Will would close his eyes and try to relive the occurrence. And in his mind, he'd see Dokes frantically trying to turn the gas off to avoid being caught in an explosion. This simply wasn't a suicide. This was cold-blooded murder. And if Dokes himself was murdered, then the real Bay Harbor Butcher is likely still lurking. Given that Will Graham would have been well aware of the suspicions that Dokes had of his coworker Dexter, I strongly believe that Will would not take his foot off the gas. He'd want to lock in on Dexter Morgan and catch the real criminal behind all of this. But here's the issue. The FBI, just as they did in the original series, would want to close this case shut and walk away with Dokes as their guy. So Will would sort of be left on his own. He doesn't have hard proof to keep the investigation going, and his thoughts on Dexter are purely based on intuition. Sure, he'd have Maria LaGuerta helping him to try to prove Dokes was innocent, but the FBI wouldn't be interested in her evidence, as it would simply serve to reopen a closed case. And simply proving the innocence of James Dokes doesn't actively prove the criminality of Dexter Morgan. So where does this leave us? Well, I think it puts us in a scenario where Will would linger in Miami and attempt to find some sort of evidence to prove that Dexter is a killer. Similarly to how proving Hannibal's criminality became an obsession for Will, Dexter would consume his thoughts. However, what largely saved Will from death in his series was how fond Hannibal became of him. And Dexter Morgan would not have such feelings towards Will Graham. One could argue that Dexter is even physically incapable of having them. And rule number 1 of the code is don't get caught after all. Dexter has killed innocent people to escape justice before, and I do believe Will Graham would be yet another one of these victims. So ultimately, could Will Graham solve the Bay Harbor Butcher case? Yes, in the sense that I do believe he would suss Dexter out, with his supernatural ability to sense killers and recreate crimes in his head. But do I think he could actually piece together enough hard evidence to put Dexter away and prove the innocence of James Dokes? No, I do not. In a physical fight, Will has next to no chance against Dexter, and I do believe Dexter would eventually make a move to take Will out. Now, with Will magically disappearing, perhaps Maria LaGuerta sets her sights onto Dexter much sooner than she did in the original series, but I sort of think that ends in a similar way as it did in Season 7. Just a few years sooner in this scenario, I suppose. All in all, I do think Will Graham could clock on to Dexter, but I don't believe he actually possesses the ability to prove his assertions and physically catch the real Bay Harbor Butcher. Well, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Who do you think would win this clash of fictional characters with extreme plot armor? Dexter Morgan or Will Graham? I've made a few versus-style videos like this now, and a playlist with all of them will be linked in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe for more Screen Stories content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.